with a new video, and this video is a video of my Charles Bronson collection, and I will be doing this in two parts as I do have a few Charles Bronson movies, and I will start from his career in the mid-50s and end the video to the mid-70s. Now, Bronson in the mid-50s to early 60s was kind of having a lot of supporting roles where he would play villains, various thugs or Indians and Mexicans. But the first movie I have of Bronson, earliest in his career, is a movie called Apache, and this is a Robert Aldrich western starring Burt Lancaster, and Bronson has a small role as an Indian, Hondo, as they try to track down Burt Lancaster, who is the Indian on the run. And actually this movie is very similar to one of the movies Bronson did in the early 70s titled Chado's Land, and it had fairly similar sort of story, an Indian on the run. So that's Apache, average western, and I was expecting a little bit more from Burt Lancaster. Another western that Bronson was in the 50s is Vera Cruz, and this stars Gary Cooper, Burt Lancaster and Ernest Borgnine. And although this is considered a classic, it kind of fell a little bit short for me, to be honest, but still a good western. And then still in the 1950s, Bronson was in this romantic theme western, Jubal, and this is a fine western starring Glenn Ford, Ernest Borgnine and Rod Steiger in a superb performance. And Bronson comes into this movie about around the halfway stage as three guys fight for the affection of a female, but very good western. And I'm probably thinking of upgrading this movie to the Criterion US Blu-ray edition. So fine western in Jubal. And Bronson's first leading role in the late 50s is a gangster B movie, goes by the name of Machine Gun Kelly, where Bronson plays a wannabe gangster, and it's not a bad little movie. And actually, when I first watched this movie, I was surprised that Bronson wasn't offered more leading roles at that time in his career, because after this movie he more or less went back into the usual spot of playing an actor in supporting roles in movies. And then 1960, Bronson was part of the Magnificent Seven in John Sturges' classic western, taken from Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai. And this is a great movie, packed with stars: Eli Wallach, James Coburn and Robert Vaughn. And although Bronson had a good role in this with the character O'Reilly, this movie really belonged to Steve McQueen and the established star at the time, Yul Brynner. But great western, The Magnificent Seven. And then in 1961 I have this film, Master of the World, and I don't know too much about this movie as I bought this just recently as a cheapie, as Bronson stars alongside Vincent Price in this movie. And then another John Sturges classic, The Great Escape, and great classic movie based on the true story, and many stars or stars to be were in this movie: Richard Attenborough, James Coburn and James Garner. And Bronson had a good role in this, as his character was Danny, the Tunnel King. And this is the Xavier Steelbook edition. That's Bronson on the back playing Danny. And this is a personal favourite film of mine, where this really established Steve McQueen as one of the great actors in the 60s, as this movie really was a Steve McQueen movie, The Great Escape. And another war movie that Bronson was in the 60s was The Dirty Dozen. And this is Robert Aldrich's movie where he directed Telly Savalas, John Cassavetes and Ernest Borgnine and Bronson, and Lee Marvin as the gang, well, the Dirty Dozen, get given an impossible mission, but great war movie, and not as good as The Great Escape, but still a classic war movie, The Dirty Dozen. And then sort of late 60s, Bronson went out to Europe, where he was trying to pick up sort of leading roles, and he spent quite a bit of time in the late 60s making movies in Europe, and he made this Euro Western, The Guns for San Sebastian, where he starred alongside Anthony Quinn. And yet again, Bronson plays another villain in this, and this is an average Western, and you could only really get an English audio edition of this movie in Australia, as there's not too many versions of this. There is a Spanish release of this movie, but that contains no English audio, but this is actually a bootleg. But not a great Western, very average. Guns for San Sebastian. And then Bronson was still in Europe when he made these French movies, Farewell Friend and Rider on the Rain. And they were both French production movies. And this is a twin billing from Wild East. And Farewell Friend, he stars alongside Alain de Leon, French actor, and that was okay, but the best one out of this twin billing is Rider on the Rain, which is a crime mystery movie, and this is one of Bronson's better roles in Rider on the Rain, as he plays a character named Dobbs. Great addition of these two movies, and one of Bronson's best acting performances in Rider on the Rain. Then Bronson made another Western, Vila Rides, alongside Robert Mitchum and Yul Brynner. And again, Bronson plays a villain in this movie. And this is the American Blu-ray release by Olive Films. And this is okay, but nothing great about this movie. Fairly average. But while Bronson was in Europe in the late 60s, and when he was filming Farewell Friend with Alain de Leon, he got a call from Sergio Leone, where quite a few times he was offered a role in the Dollars trilogy movies, and Bronson always turned Leone down. But this time he took the role of harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West, And this is one of the greatest spaghetti westerns of all time, or westerns I should say. And even though this movie is packed with established stars like Henry Fonda and Jason Robards and Claudia Cardinale, Bronson was the hero in this movie and stole the show. Great movie, great intro, and the finale is one of my favourite finales to a movie. And this has a fantastic soundtrack score by Ennio Morricone. But this is the UK collector's DVD edition, and it's a twin pack, and it contains features, a little booklet of the movie, and it's a fine release of Once Upon a Time in the West. And also another edition I have of the movie is the Xavier Steelbook that was limited and now sold out, of Once Upon a Time in the West. Had to pick this up as a collector's piece. The Xavier Steelbook limited editions, I would only pick up movies that are personal favourites of mine, and Once Upon a Time in the West is a personal favourite of mine. And then Bronson made this romantic comedy drama with Suzanne George in England, where an older man has a relationship with a young teenager, Suzanne George, and Bronson was kind of trying out different roles and not the usual Bronson role that I like seeing him in. But this is Twinkie, and it's also known as Lola in other parts of the world. And then in 1970, Bronson starred alongside Tony Curtis in this war drama, You Cant Win Them All. And this is about the Greco and Turkish War in the 20s. And this is a Spanish edition of this movie, as I think this is the only English audio track version of this movie. And it's an average war movie. It started off okay, but kind of sizzled out towards the end. You can't win them all. And then Bronson goes back to his more tough guy persona in Sergio Solima's Eurocrime movie Violent City. And this is also known in the US as The Family, where Bronson plays a hitman. And this also stars Telly Savalas and Jill Ireland as her first movie together with Charles Bronson. And this is the Italian Blu-ray edition, the only Blu-ray edition of this movie, and it does contain an English audio. And this is uncut as well. Fine movie, Violent City. And Bronson made a few movies with director Terence Young, and this is the first movie that they made together, Cold Sweat. Not a bad movie. Also stars James Mason in this movie as the bad guy, and yet again Jill Ireland is in this movie as well, as this is a French and Italian production, Cold Sweat. And then into 1970, this movie here, Someone Behind the Door. Very, very underrated movie, and this is a French production movie. And actually this movie was filmed in the UK, in Folkestone. And without giving too much away, Bronson kind of loses his memory in this movie and gets accused of murder. And This also stars Anthony Perkins, and Jill Island has a small role in this. But a very good movie, and this is the only decent transfer of this movie, and it's a US edition put out by Lionsgate, as there is quite a few versions of this movie, but they are cheaply made. But this one by Lionsgate is the best one to get of this movie, Someone Behind the Door. And then on to another Terence Young movie, the second one that he made. This is the Euro Western, Red Sun, starring Alain de Leon and Ursula Andress. And this is a very good Western. And this is a UK edition of this movie. And an essential Bronson movie, Red Sun, one of my favourites. And then Bronson makes his first movie with Michael Winner, Chado's Land, and not a bad movie, where Bronson is an Indian on the run as he kills somebody in self-defense, and then the posse led by Jack Palance try to hunt Charles Bronson down. And this is the UK DVD version of this, and I kept this version because this is uncut, unlike the Twilight Time version where that is just slightly cut. So I've opted to keep this version of Chado's Land. And then the next Charles Bronson movie that he made with Michael Winner is The Mechanic. And what a movie this is. One of Bronson's best movies, where he plays an assassin as he takes on a young apprentice, Jan Michael Vincent, and he plays Arthur Bishop in this kind of like cat and mouse game, because the young protege wants to learn off Bronson and then eventually take him out. But great Charles Bronson movie, and this is the Twilight Time release. And although this is quite expensive now, as it was limited to 3,000 copies, it is a version and movie that all Bronson fans must have and watch. The Mechanic. And then the next one is the Veloci Papers, another Terence Young movie which he directed, and this is the third movie he directed with Bronson. And after the success of the Godfather movies, they made this movie, the Veloci Papers, and this is also known in some countries as Cosa Nostra, and Bronson plays Joe Veloci in this movie. And this is the Japanese Blu-ray edition of this, and it does contain an English audio. And I think Twilight Time is putting their version out of the Veloci Papers out in June or July, so I think I might be picking that one up. But underrated and a very good movie, the Veloci Papers. And then Bronson went back to making another Western. This is the Valdez Horses with John Sturges. He reunites with John Sturges again, and it's not a bad Western. And Jill Island has a role in this movie. And this movie is also known as Chino, and is exactly the same movie. It's just the title in Europe and the title in the US. But this is supposed to be the best version of this movie, Chino, or the Valdez Horses, and bought this recently. This is a French special collector's edition, and it does have an English audio. And I need to check this one out. And I bought this on Amazon France. Chino, not a bad Western. And Bronson, and with Michael Winner, the Stone Killer, where Bronson takes on the mafia in this kind of Dirty Harry type role, as a lot of the movies in the 70s were sort of like maverick cop movies, which after the success of Dirty Harry and the French Connection, these movies were coming out, and this is not a bad movie. And there is a Blu-ray release of this movie due out in June by Indicator in the UK. So I am looking forward to seeing the Stone Killer on Blu-ray for the first time, but not a bad movie. And another personal favourite of mine, directed by Richard Fleischer, Charles Bronson, in Mr. Majestic. And this is a great Charles Bronson kick-ass movie where Bronson is a former Vietnam vet living the life of a farmer who grows his own fruit crop and gets hassled by a gang of hoodlums and a hitman. And this is the UK edition of this movie of Mr. Majestic, and definitely a recommended Charles Bronson movie. And so much so that I love that movie, Mr. Majestic, I bought the French media book version of this, and it's limited, and it contains the DVD, the Blu-ray, and an 88-page book. And Bronson Collector's Edition are very hard to find and very few, but this is limited to just over 6,000. And I picked this version of this movie on French Amazon, and it was going for €25 and was well worth it. I've yet to open this up yet and fully to check it out, and I probably might make a separate video of this, of the Mr. Majestic French media book. And then the last film that I'm going to end this video on is the Michael Winner classic Death Wish, where Bronson plays Paul Kersey, a man who gets affected by a home invasion involving his daughter and his wife. And then it sends Bronson over the edge, where he turns into a vigilante on the streets of New York. And this is a US release of this movie. Great to see this movie out on Blu-ray, but we really do need to see a collector's edition of this great movie. And it should be put out in the UK, because the UK for so many years failed to put out Bronson movies, as a lot of the Death Wish movies do get cut to pieces. It would be great to see a company in the UK finally putting out the Death Wish series on Blu-ray. But great movie, and this is probably Charles Bronson's greatest role and most famous role in Death Wish. So I'll end the video on that. So guys, please feel free to sub or drop a comment and let me know what your favourite Charles Bronson movie is, or if you would like to know any info about these editions. And I will be doing part 2 of my Charles Bronson collection soon. So take care, guys, and look out for part 2 soon.